Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15th, 1769, in the coastal town of Ajaccio on the island of Corsica, only a few months after the island had been ceded by the Republic of Genoa to France. His arrival into the world came at a moment of political turbulence, when Corsica's long struggle for independence under the leadership of Pasquale Paoli had been crushed by the French army. The Bonaparte family had been minor Italian nobility for generations, tracing their roots back to the Tuscan city of Sarzana, but in Corsica they were simply part of the island's small elite, respected enough to claim status, but not wealthy enough to live without careful management of their resources. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer and political figure who had initially supported Pauli's independence movement before aligning himself with the new French administration, a decision born of pragmatism rather than loyalty. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, was known for her discipline, resilience, and devotion to her children, qualities that would deeply influence Napoleon's own sense of order and determination. The Bonapartes had 8 surviving children, and Napoleon was the second son. From an early age, he stood out not for his physical strength. He was small, wiry, and sometimes sickly, but for an intense and almost stubborn intelligence. He listened closely to the conversations of adults, absorbed their arguments about politics and war, and asked questions that often seemed far beyond his years. Growing up on an island where resentment toward France still lingered, he inherited a complicated sense of identity. Corsican pride was woven into his earliest memories, but the reality of his father's political alignment meant that Napoleon's opportunities would come from embracing French education and institutions. The young boy's early schooling took place in Ajaccio, where he quickly showed an aptitude for mathematics and history, as well as a fierce competitive streak that made him determined to excel even when resources were limited. In 1779, when Napoleon was just 9 years old, Carlo secured a scholarship for him to attend the military academy at Brienne-le-Château in mainland France. The journey was long and unfamiliar, and for a boy raised in the Mediterranean sun, the gray, damp climate of northern France was a shock. He spoke French with a thick Corsican accent, and his fellow students often mocked him for it, calling him an outsider. Yet rather than retreat into self-pity, Napoleon responded with a stubborn independence. He preferred solitude, spending hours in the school library, reading about the great leaders of history, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Hannibal, men whose names had endured because of their ambition and military brilliance. Outside the classroom, he practiced mathematics obsessively, seeing in geometry and artillery calculations a language of war that did not require social approval. At Brienne, Napoleon's character began to harden. He learned to mask his sensitivity beneath a layer of confidence and sometimes biting sarcasm. The isolation he felt as a foreigner drove him to build an inner world of strategy and planning. While his classmates played games, he constructed elaborate mock battles in the snow, organizing miniature armies and experimenting with tactics. Teachers noticed that he possessed a restless mind that seemed always to be searching for the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove himself. Although he could be fiery-tempered, he rarely wasted his energy on matters that did not serve his ambitions. He was not popular, but he was respected, perhaps even feared, by those who recognized his sharp intellect. His father's death in 1785 left the Bonaparte family in financial difficulty, and the responsibility of helping support them fell partly on Napoleon's young shoulders. That same year, at just 16, he completed his studies at Brienne and was admitted to the École Militaire in Paris, an elite institution where he would train as an artillery officer. The Paris years refined his technical skills, teaching him the precision and discipline of artillery command, but they also introduced him to the bustling heart of French society at a time when political unrest was beginning to stir. Even as a young man, he noticed the inequality and corruption of the old order, and though his future was still uncertain, he began to imagine how such a system might be overturned by a man of vision and determination. Napoleon's formative years on Corsica had instilled in him a deep sense of pride, an awareness of struggle, and a relentless need to rise above his circumstances. His small stature had never deterred him. Instead, it seemed to fuel his determination to stand taller in achievement than in height. His mother's strict discipline had given him self-control, while the memory of his father's political compromises taught him that survival often depended on adapting to new realities. By the time he stepped out of the École Militaire as a young lieutenant, he was no longer just a boy from Corsica. He was a man with a sharpened mind, a quiet but unshakable ambition, and an unspoken conviction that destiny had marked him for something far greater than the rank he now held. What he lacked in wealth or influence, he possessed in willpower, and in the years ahead, that willpower would carry him from obscurity to the center of European history. When Napoleon arrived at the École Militaire in Paris in late 1784, he was entering an environment that was as competitive as it was prestigious. The school was designed to produce the officers who would lead France's armies, and it demanded discipline, intellectual rigor, and a mastery of both theory and practice. Napoleon, barely 15 when he began his studies, was younger than many of his classmates, but his time at Brienne had already taught him how to thrive under pressure. At Paris, he chose to specialize in artillery, a branch of the army that required both mathematical precision and quick decision-making. He knew that artillery was the most technical field in the military, less dependent on noble birth for advancement than cavalry or infantry, and he saw in it an opportunity to rise based on merit rather than family influence. His studies at the École Militaire were intense and highly structured. Days were filled with lessons in ballistics, fortifications, engineering, and the use of heavy guns in the field. Napoleon absorbed these teachings with methodical determination, understanding that mastery of artillery could be the key to battlefield dominance. Outside the lecture halls, he devoured books on history and military theory, continuing his habit of studying the lives of great leaders. His admiration for Julius Caesar deepened, but he also paid close attention to more modern strategists, studying Frederick the Great's campaigns for their emphasis on mobility and surprise. He was already forming ideas that would later become trademarks of his own style: rapid movement, concentration of force at decisive points, and the use of terrain to outmaneuver the enemy. Life in Paris was a stark contrast to his years in Brienne. The city was crowded, noisy, and alive with political debate. Though Napoleon kept to himself for the most part, he observed the growing discontent among ordinary citizens. Prices were rising, bread shortages were becoming common, and the divide between the aristocracy and the common people seemed to be widening. The seeds of revolution were already in the air, and Napoleon, though still loyal to the army and the monarchy, took note of these tensions. His upbringing in Corsica had taught him what it was like to live under a government that inspired resentment, and now he was seeing similar feelings in the heart of France. In 1785, tragedy struck when his father Carlo died from stomach cancer, leaving the Bonaparte family in financial difficulty. Napoleon felt the weight of responsibility more keenly than ever, determined to finish his studies as quickly as possible so that he could earn a salary and help his family. He compressed what was normally a 2-year program at the École Militaire into just 1 year. His graduation that same year, at the age of 16, made him the youngest artillery lieutenant in the French army. This accomplishment reflected not only his academic skill, but also his capacity for relentless work when faced with necessity. His first posting was to the La Fère Artillery Regiment in Valence, a small garrison town in the Rhone Valley. Life as a junior officer was modest, the pay was low, and the routines could be dull. Yet Napoleon used his time well, reading widely and writing essays on topics ranging from military organization to political philosophy. He also began drafting early ideas about how France could strengthen its military, particularly through better training and more efficient use of artillery. At the same time, he remained deeply connected to Corsica, returning whenever possible and maintaining contact with political figures there. The pull between his French military career and his Corsican identity would define much of his early adulthood. In Corsica, tensions still simmered between those loyal to France and those who dreamed of independence. Napoleon admired Pasquale Paoli, the island's revolutionary leader, but their relationship would later sour as political divisions deepened. For now, though, Napoleon managed to balance his roles, an officer serving France and a Corsican still tied to his homeland's cause. The late 1780s brought growing unrest across France as the monarchy's debts mounted and the Estates General was called in 1789. The revolutionary spirit began to surge. Napoleon, stationed in various garrisons, watched from a distance as the old order started to crumble. The revolution would soon open new doors for ambitious officers willing to align themselves with its ideals, and Napoleon, though cautious at first, recognized that the upheaval might offer the chance to advance far beyond what peacetime service could allow. He was a young man with technical skill, sharp ambition, and a mind already shaped by both personal struggle and the study of history. The world around him was about to erupt, and Napoleon Bonaparte was ready to step into the fire. By the summer of 1793, France was a nation under siege, politically, socially, and militarily. The ideals of liberty and equality that had ignited the revolution just a few years earlier were now overshadowed by violence, mistrust, and foreign intervention. Monarchist uprisings erupted in several regions, and in the south, the port city of Toulon became one of the gravest threats to the young French Republic. Strategically located on the Mediterranean coast, Toulon housed a major naval base essential for controlling the sea. When royalist forces in the city rebelled against the revolutionary government, they invited the British fleet, commanded by Admiral Hood, to occupy the harbor. With that, Toulon effectively became a fortress for the enemies of the revolution. Losing the city meant losing France's Mediterranean lifeline, and Paris was determined to reclaim it at any cost. Napoleon Bonaparte was at this time a young artillery captain in the Army of Italy, still largely unknown outside his own circle of officers. His recent experiences in Corsica had been turbulent, He had admired the island's revolutionary leader, Pasquale Paoli, but the relationship had collapsed, turning into hostility when Paoli opposed France. Forced into exile from his homeland, Napoleon cast his lot fully with the French Republic. That loyalty would soon be tested and rewarded at Toulon. When he arrived in late summer, the French besieging forces were in disarray. The commanders lacked coordination, and the artillery, Napoleon's area of expertise, was poorly managed, with guns scattered haphazardly, poorly aimed, and badly supplied. Many officers saw Toulon as a simple matter of storming the walls, but Napoleon quickly realized that such a frontal attack would end in disaster. The British fleet's heavy guns dominated the harbor and could shell any French assault. Taking the city required a more precise and calculated approach. Napoleon studied the terrain for days, observing every movement of the enemy. He noted that two positions, Fort L'Aiguillette and Fort Balaguer, commanded the harbor entrance. If the French could seize these high points and mount artillery there, they could bombard the British fleet directly, forcing it to retreat. It was an ambitious plan, requiring careful coordination and the rapid construction of new batteries. Napoleon proposed it to his superiors, who, desperate for a breakthrough, approved the idea. From that moment, Napoleon threw himself into the work. He personally oversaw the placement of every cannon, often standing in the mud and cold alongside his men. He made sure each gun was aimed with mathematical precision, calculating distances and trajectories himself when necessary. Supplies were scarce, so he improvised, scavenging materials and pushing his soldiers to work through the night to prepare positions. His energy was relentless, and though some officers resented his youth and direct manner, few could deny his skill. His decisiveness began to inspire confidence among the rank and file, who saw in him a commander willing to endure the same hardships they faced. The siege was long and grueling, winter set in, and the constant skirmishes drained morale. Yet Napoleon kept refining his artillery positions, closing in on the enemy with every passing week. In mid-December, the French launched their decisive assault. Napoleon's batteries roared to life, hammering Fort L'Aiguillette with such intensity that the defenders could not hold. Once the French seized the fort, they quickly turned its guns on the harbor. As the young captain had predicted, the British fleet found itself exposed to a withering bombardment. Within days, the Royal Navy began to withdraw, and Toulon's royalists, seeing their position collapse, fled or surrendered. The fall of Toulon was a critical victory for the Republic, but for Napoleon it was a personal transformation. His plan had worked with near mathematical precision, demonstrating that artillery, when placed and used with strategic insight, could alter the course of a siege. General Dugommier, commander of the French forces, praised him openly, calling his work decisive to the success of the operation. In recognition of his achievements, Napoleon was promoted on the spot to brigadier general, a leap in rank that few officers achieved so young. Yet perhaps the most important result was the attention it brought him in Paris. In a republic where revolutionary merit could lift a man faster than aristocratic birth ever had, Napoleon's name began to circulate among politicians and generals. They saw in him not only a competent officer, but also a man capable of original thought and decisive action, qualities desperately needed in a time when France faced enemies on all sides. For Napoleon himself, Toulon was proof that his ideas, shaped by years of study and sharpened by personal hardship, could succeed under the pressure of real combat. It was the first time he had turned theory into victory,
the first time he had imposed his will on events in a way that changed the outcome of a battle. Standing amid the smoke and ruins of the recaptured port, he could feel that something had shifted. The Republic still teetered on the edge of survival, and war raged across Europe, but Napoleon Bonaparte was no longer just a young artillery officer from Corsica. He was a rising figure in the French army, and his path toward greatness had begun.
In the wake of his triumph at Toulon, Napoleon Bonaparte's star began to rise rapidly within the revolutionary military hierarchy. By early 1796, at just 26 years old, he was appointed commander of the French army of Italy, a force that was ill-equipped, poorly supplied, and demoralized after years of neglect and setbacks. The Italian front was considered a secondary theater compared to the more prominent campaigns against Austria and Prussia elsewhere in Europe. But Napoleon recognized the opportunity this assignment presented. He saw that with bold leadership, strategic brilliance, and swift action, he could not only secure victory, but also carve out a lasting legacy for himself. From the moment he assumed command, Napoleon set about transforming the army. He reorganized the units, emphasizing speed, flexibility, and morale. He was an exacting leader, demanding discipline, but also inspiring loyalty through personal example. Napoleon shared hardships with his troops, visiting the front lines and ensuring his men were fed and clothed, even when resources were scarce. Unlike many commanders who relied on rigid formations, he encouraged initiative among his officers, fostering a spirit of innovation and daring. His plan was to strike fast before the Austrians and their allies could gather overwhelming strength. The campaign began in April 1796, and from the outset, Napoleon's strategy reflected his deep understanding of the terrain and the enemy. Italy's mountainous landscape was treacherous and fragmented, but Napoleon used this to his advantage, moving his forces rapidly through difficult passes and striking unexpected targets. He was a master of the divide and conquer approach, isolating enemy forces from each other to prevent them from uniting against him. His forces moved in coordinated columns, converging suddenly on key points and overwhelming their opponents with concentrated firepower. The battles that followed became legendary for their audacity and speed. At Montagnat, Napoleon scored his first major victory by outmaneuvering the Austrian army, breaking their lines, and forcing a retreat. Within weeks, he defeated Piedmontese forces allied with Austria, compelling the Kingdom of Sardinia to seek peace and withdraw from the war. He pressed his advantage relentlessly, advancing into Lombardy and winning a series of engagements at Millesimo, Digo, and Mondovì. His ability to inspire his troops to endure harsh conditions and rapid marches allowed him to seize territory that his enemies had believed secure. Napoleon's military genius was matched by his political savvy. He understood that to solidify French control, he needed more than just battlefield victories. He negotiated treaties with local rulers and city-states, often offering favorable terms in exchange for cooperation or neutrality. His forces were sometimes welcomed as liberators from oppressive aristocratic regimes, and he used propaganda effectively, sending reports of victories back to Paris that painted the campaign as a crusade for revolutionary ideals. This helped bolster support for the war at home and justified the sometimes harsh requisitions made on local populations. Perhaps the most stunning example of his brilliance was the Battle of Lodi in May 1796.
Facing a retreating Austrian rear guard across a narrow bridge over the Adda River, Napoleon personally led an assault to seize the position. The attack was risky. The bridge was exposed, and enemy fire was intense, but the gamble paid off. The French forced their way across, breaking Austrian resistance and forcing a wider retreat. This moment became emblematic of Napoleon's leadership style, bold, personal, and decisive. His troops revered him for his courage, and the victory sent a clear message that the French army was a force to be reckoned with. As the campaign continued through the summer, Napoleon marched his forces into Milan, the heart of Austrian power in northern Italy, declaring himself the protector of the city. He established a provisional government that implemented reforms aligned with revolutionary principles, abolishing feudal privileges, reorganizing the legal system, and promoting secular education. These acts strengthened his political position and helped stabilize the region under French control. By the time the Treaty of Campo Formio was signed in 1797, ending hostilities between France and Austria, Napoleon had achieved a stunning series of military and political victories. He had expanded French territory, weakened Austria's influence in Italy, and enhanced his own reputation as a commander capable of winning against the odds. Yet the campaign was not without controversy. The harshness of French occupation, including heavy taxation and requisitioning of supplies, sowed resentment among local populations. Napoleon's aggressive pursuit of power and wealth through art plunder and political maneuvering hinted at ambitions beyond mere military success. Still, the Italian campaigns marked a turning point, not only in the French Revolutionary Wars, but in Napoleon's own life. He had proven himself not just a brilliant tactician, but a leader who could inspire men, govern conquered lands, and navigate the complex politics of war and diplomacy. His rise from obscure artillery officer to one of Europe's most formidable generals was complete. The victories in Italy laid the foundation for his later ambitions, showing that through speed, strategy, and unyielding will, he could reshape the continent itself.
In the spring of 1798, riding the momentum of his stunning success in Italy, Napoleon Bonaparte set his sights on a bold and ambitious new venture, the Egyptian expedition. France's enemies, particularly Britain, maintained a powerful naval presence in the Mediterranean, threatening French interests and trade routes. Napoleon's plan was to strike at the heart of British influence by invading Egypt, a land historically known as the gateway between Europe and Asia, and then under the nominal control of the Ottoman Empire, but with increasing British influence. His goal was not only to weaken Britain's position, but also to establish a French presence in the Middle East that could eventually lead to influence in India, the crown jewel of the British Empire. This campaign would combine military conquest, scientific exploration, and propaganda, a fusion of warfare and Enlightenment ideals. Napoleon assembled a fleet and an army of approximately 40,000 men, along with a team of scholars, scientists, and artists, the Commission des Sciences et des Arts, tasked with studying and documenting Egypt's history, culture, and natural environment. This unprecedented integration of military and scientific effort underscored Napoleon's vision of conquest, not merely as territorial gain, but as a mission of knowledge and civilization. The expedition departed from Toulon in May 1798, sailing across the Mediterranean with confidence. The landing in Egypt took the Ottoman and British forces by surprise. On July 1st, 1798, Napoleon's troops decisively defeated the Mamluk cavalry at the Battle of the Pyramids near Cairo, using innovative infantry squares to repel the famed horsemen and secure a swift victory. This battle demonstrated Napoleon's tactical brilliance and the effectiveness of his modern army against traditional cavalry forces. The capture of Cairo followed soon after, and Napoleon sought to establish French administration, introducing reforms and attempting to present himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror to the local population. However, the campaign was not without significant challenges. Despite the land victories, the French fleet suffered a catastrophic blow at the Battle of the Nile in August 1798, when the British Royal Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, attacked and destroyed most of the French ships anchored at Aboukir Bay. This naval defeat effectively stranded Napoleon's army in Egypt, cutting off reinforcements and resupply routes. It also shifted the balance of power in the Mediterranean, emboldening Britain and its allies. On the ground, Napoleon faced difficulties controlling the vast and culturally complex territory. His efforts to win over the Egyptians were mixed, and resistance movements began to emerge, especially from Ottoman loyalists and local insurgents. The harsh desert climate, logistical problems, and diseases such as the plague further strained French forces. To maintain morale and legitimacy, Napoleon promoted the idea that France's presence was a scientific and cultural mission, supporting the work of his scholars who conducted pioneering research on Egyptian antiquities. One of the most famous outcomes of the expedition was the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, which later became the key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs and unlocking the secrets of ancient Egypt's civilization. This achievement gave the campaign a lasting legacy far beyond its military objectives. Politically, the Egyptian expedition was a double-edged sword. While it demonstrated Napoleon's willingness to take daring risks and his ability to combine warfare with intellectual ambition, it also diverted him from events back in France, where the political situation remained volatile. In 1799, sensing the opportunity for greater power, Napoleon quietly left his army in Egypt and returned to France, where he would soon seize control through the coup of 18 Brumaire. Despite its mixed military outcomes, the Egyptian campaign enhanced Napoleon's mythos as a leader who bridged the worlds of soldier and scholar. It showcased his vision of conquest as both a practical and symbolic endeavor, and deepened his reputation as one of the most innovative and dynamic figures of his time. The expedition also left a mark on Europe's imagination, fueling the growing fascination with Egyptology and the Orient. After his bold Egyptian campaign, Napoleon Bonaparte faced a pivotal moment in his career. Though he had won battles and earned a reputation as a brilliant military commander, his army was stranded in Egypt following the devastating British naval victory at the Battle of the Nile. Cut off from France and reinforcements, Napoleon's position there was precarious. Meanwhile, back in France, political turmoil was reaching a fever pitch. The revolutionary government known as the Directory was weak and unpopular, plagued by corruption, economic crisis, and ongoing war. The country was ripe for a strong leader to step forward and seize control. Sensing the moment, Napoleon resolved to return to France to claim his place at the center of power. In August 1799, under the cloak of secrecy, Napoleon slipped away from his command in Egypt and began the risky journey home. The Mediterranean was dominated by the British Navy, making travel hazardous. Nevertheless, through careful planning, a disguise, and a swift passage, he successfully evaded British patrols and landed in France by early October. His arrival in Paris coincided with growing dissatisfaction toward the Directory, which was struggling to maintain order and facing threats from both royalist conspiracies and radical revolutionaries. The stage was set for a dramatic political shift. Napoleon quickly aligned himself with influential political figures who shared his desire to overhaul the ineffective government. Among them was Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, one of the directors, who sought to establish a new constitutional order but lacked the military force to do so. Recognizing the value of Napoleon's military reputation and charisma, Sieyès and his allies invited him to join their plans for a coup d'état. Napoleon, ambitious and calculating, understood that this was the opportunity he had been waiting for to ascend from general to ruler. On November 9th, 1799, corresponding to the 18th of Brumaire, according to the revolutionary calendar, Napoleon launched the coup that would change France forever. With the support of loyal troops, he entered Paris and swiftly moved to neutralize opposition. The legislative councils, the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients, were dispersed amidst confusion and intimidation. Deputies who resisted were confronted by soldiers, and the revolutionary assemblies were effectively dissolved. In the chaos, the Directory was abolished, and a new government, the consulate, was established with Napoleon as first consul, the most powerful position in the nation. Though the consulate was technically a republic, the coup concentrated executive power firmly in Napoleon's hands. He skillfully framed his takeover as a necessary step to preserve the revolution's gains while restoring stability and order to a France exhausted by years of upheaval. To legitimize his authority, plebiscites were held, in which the French people overwhelmingly endorsed the new government, though these votes were heavily managed and manipulated. Napoleon's image as a savior of France was carefully cultivated through propaganda, public ceremonies, and his control over the press. In the months that followed, Napoleon moved decisively to consolidate his power. He restructured the government, creating an efficient and centralized bureaucracy staffed by capable administrators loyal to him. He reformed the tax system, improved public education, and strengthened the judiciary. His legal reforms culminated in the development of the Napoleonic Code, which codified laws in a way that balanced revolutionary principles with practical governance. The code abolished feudal privileges, guaranteed property rights, and established legal equality for men, leaving a lasting legacy far beyond France's borders. At the same time, Napoleon sought reconciliation with the Catholic Church through the Concordat of 1801, restoring some of the Church's influence while maintaining state control. This move helped to heal the religious divisions that had torn France apart during the Revolution, winning the support of many who had been alienated by earlier secular policies. Napoleon's pragmatic approach combined authoritarian control with reforms designed to stabilize society and promote economic growth. The coup of 18 Brumaire thus marked not only Napoleon's rise to power, but also a turning point in French history. It ended the revolutionary era's more chaotic and radical experiments and ushered in a period of strong centralized rule under Napoleon's leadership. His political skill, combined with his military reputation, allowed him to dominate the French state,
setting the stage for his eventual proclamation as emperor. For Napoleon personally, the coup was the fulfillment of years of ambition and careful calculation. From a young artillery officer of Corsican origin, he had navigated the complexities of revolutionary France, used his military successes as a stepping stone, and seized the moment to become the dominant figure in the nation. The man who emerged from the events of Brumaire was no longer merely a soldier, but the architect of a new political order, one that promised stability and greatness, but would also carry France and Europe into a new and turbulent era.
With the foundations of his rule firmly laid by the coup of 18 Brumaire, Napoleon Bonaparte quickly turned his attention to transforming France from a country fractured by years of revolution, war, and political chaos into a modern, orderly, and efficient state. Though he wielded near autocratic power as first consul, Napoleon understood that lasting authority required more than military might. It demanded administrative reform, legal clarity, and social stability. Over the next several years, he embarked on a sweeping program to reshape France's institutions, laws, and society, leaving a legacy that would endure well beyond his own lifetime. One of Napoleon's most enduring achievements was the creation of the Napoleonic Code, formerly known as the Civil Code of 1804. Before its enactment, France's legal system was a confusing patchwork of local customs, feudal laws, and revolutionary decrees that varied widely from region to region. This legal fragmentation created uncertainty and hindered economic development. Napoleon, drawing upon Enlightenment principles and his military precision, set out to craft a comprehensive, unified body of law that would apply equally across all of France. The code emphasized clearly written laws accessible to ordinary citizens, establishing legal equality for men, protecting property rights, and defining civil procedures. Importantly, it abolished privileges based on birth or social status, reinforcing revolutionary ideals while promoting order and predictability. Though it limited some freedoms, particularly those of women and workers, the code's influence extended far beyond France, becoming the legal foundation for many countries worldwide. Alongside legal reform, Napoleon overhauled France's administrative structure to create a centralized and efficient government. He reorganized the country into departments, each governed by prefects appointed directly by him. These prefects were responsible for law enforcement, tax collection, and implementation of government policies, ensuring loyalty to the central authority and reducing the power of local elites. Napoleon's bureaucracy was meritocratic, favoring competence and loyalty over aristocratic birth. This restructuring strengthened the state's capacity to govern and respond swiftly to challenges, stabilizing a nation weary from revolutionary upheaval. Education was another pillar of Napoleon's reform agenda. Believing that a strong state required an educated citizenry capable of contributing to its strength, he established the lycée system, state-run secondary schools designed to train future administrators, military officers, and professionals. These institutions emphasized discipline, rigorous curricula, and patriotism, reflecting Napoleon's belief in shaping not just knowledge, but character. Higher education and technical training were also expanded, reinforcing France's competitive edge in science and engineering. Recognizing the deep divisions between France and the Catholic Church following the Revolution's anti-clerical phase, Napoleon sought reconciliation to heal social fractures and legitimize his rule. The Concordat of 1801 was a landmark agreement between Napoleon and Pope Pius VII. It restored the Church's role in French society, allowing public worship and recognizing Catholicism as the religion of the majority, while maintaining state control over church appointments and finances. This pragmatic compromise appeased many devout French citizens without undermining the authority of the state. It also enhanced Napoleon's image as a unifier and stabilizer, blending revolutionary secularism with traditional religion. Economically, Napoleon pursued policies aimed at recovery and growth. He established the Bank of France to stabilize the currency and provide credit, encouraged infrastructure projects like roads and canals to improve trade and communication, and supported industry and agriculture through protective tariffs and modernization efforts. Though war continued to consume resources, these measures strengthened the domestic economy and improved living standards for many. Throughout his reforms, Napoleon was careful to balance the ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, with the need for strong leadership and social order. While he curtailed political freedoms such as freedom of the press and assembly, he justified these actions as necessary to preserve stability and prevent chaos. His regime was authoritarian but not arbitrary, relying on law, bureaucracy, and propaganda to maintain control. By reshaping France's legal system, government administration, education, and church relations, Napoleon created the framework for a modern state. These reforms enhanced France's internal cohesion, strengthened its institutions, and projected an image of progress and order. The Napoleonic Code, in particular, became a lasting symbol of his rule, influencing legal systems across Europe and beyond for generations. For Napoleon himself, these domestic achievements were as vital as his military victories. They established him not only as a conqueror, but as a nation builder, someone who could harness revolutionary ideals while imposing the discipline and unity necessary for a powerful state. His vision of governance combined the Enlightenment's rationalism with pragmatic authoritarianism, crafting a new political model that would define the era. In December 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte took a momentous step that would forever transform his status and the future of France, his coronation as Emperor of the French. This grand ceremony, held in the magnificent Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, was not simply a display of pomp and pageantry. It was a carefully orchestrated political act that symbolized Napoleon's unique vision of power, authority, and legitimacy. Through this coronation, he asserted himself not as a mere successor to the revolution's ideals, nor as a servant to the church, but as a sovereign whose authority derived from his own will and the consent of the people. The road to the imperial crown had been paved by years of military and political success. By 1804, Napoleon's power as first consul had grown to near absolute levels, but he sought to crown his achievements with a title that would place him on equal footing with the great monarchs of Europe. The revolution had abolished the monarchy and rejected the divine right of kings, yet Napoleon recognized the enduring appeal and stability that an imperial crown could confer. His coronation was designed to blend revolutionary legitimacy with monarchical grandeur, signaling a new era that was both a continuation and a transformation of the past. The ceremony itself was steeped in symbolism. Unlike traditional French monarchs, who had their crowns placed on their heads by the Pope, Napoleon shocked many by taking the crown from Pope Pius VII and placing it on his own head. This act was deliberate and profound, signifying that his authority was self-derived rather than granted by religious sanction. It underscored Napoleon's belief that his power was rooted in personal merit and the will of the French people, not divine right. This moment became one of the most famous images of his reign, encapsulating his complex relationship with religion, tradition, and revolutionary ideals. The presence of the Pope at the ceremony lent a veneer of religious legitimacy, important for appeasing Catholic France and European monarchies, wary of the revolution's anti-clericalism. Yet Napoleon's control over the event ensured that the church played a subordinate role. The coronation was as much a spectacle of state power as a religious ritual, with elaborate pageantry, military displays, and the participation of dignitaries from across Europe. It projected an image of strength, order, and renewal, a carefully crafted narrative that Napoleon was both heir and innovator of France's destiny. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, was crowned empress in the same ceremony, symbolizing the establishment of a new imperial family. Their presence represented continuity and stability, though their marriage was also marked by political calculation and personal complexity. Josephine's grace and charm helped humanize Napoleon's image, making the imperial court a center of culture and fashion that rivaled the old monarchy. Beyond the ceremony, the coronation marked a shift in governance. Napoleon now ruled as emperor, with powers far exceeding those of the first consul. His rule was characterized by a strong central authority, supported by a loyal bureaucracy and an extensive propaganda machine that glorified his achievements and ideals. He continued to reform laws, expand the French Empire, and enforce order across the continent, positioning himself as the dominant figure in European politics. The coronation also sent a clear message to Europe's monarchies. While Napoleon had risen through revolutionary upheaval and military prowess, he was now claiming the traditional trappings of kingship, signaling that France was no longer a republic, but a restored empire under his control. This duality, a ruler born of revolution yet crowned as emperor, would define much of Napoleon's reign and the tensions it created on the continent. Ultimately, the coronation was a defining moment in Napoleon's transformation from a revolutionary general to an imperial sovereign. It symbolized his ambition to shape not only France, but all of Europe according to his vision of order, power, and modernity. The ceremony's blend of revolutionary symbolism and monarchical tradition encapsulated the paradoxes of his rule, a man who sought to reconcile liberty with authority, change with continuity, and personal destiny with national grandeur. Following his coronation as emperor in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte embarked on a sweeping series of military campaigns that would dramatically reshape the political landscape of Europe. His ambitions extended far beyond France's borders. He sought to establish a continental empire under French dominance, spreading revolutionary reforms while consolidating his own power. Over the next decade, through a combination of brilliant strategy, rapid maneuvers, and relentless warfare, Napoleon's armies toppled old regimes, redrew maps, and challenged the established order. Napoleon's first major test as emperor came swiftly with the War of the Third Coalition, 1805. Britain, Austria, Russia, and other powers formed an alliance, determined to curb France's growing influence. Napoleon responded with characteristic speed and decisiveness, leading his Grande Armée on a remarkable march across Europe. In September 1805, his forces crushed the Austrian and Russian armies at the Battle of Austerlitz, often hailed as his greatest victory. Employing deception and tactical genius, Napoleon baited his enemies into attacking what appeared to be a weak center, only to unleash devastating counterattacks that shattered their lines. The victory solidified French dominance in Central Europe and forced Austria to sue for peace. Following Austerlitz, Napoleon reorganized the German states through the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine, a coalition of client states that effectively ended the Holy Roman Empire, which had endured for centuries. This bold political restructuring further expanded French influence and weakened Austria and Prussia. Napoleon's reforms spread administrative efficiency, legal codes, and secular governance across these territories, embedding revolutionary principles even as he ruled with imperial authority. In 1806 and 1807, the conflict shifted as Prussia and Russia entered the war against France. Napoleon again demonstrated his military prowess, defeating Prussia at the battles of Jena and Auerstedt, and then forcing Russia to retreat after the brutal Battle of Friedland. The resulting treaties of Tilsit in 1807 established peace between France and its former enemies, creating a precarious balance of power with Napoleon as the dominant force. These treaties allowed him to impose the continental system, an economic blockade designed to weaken Britain by cutting off its trade with the European continent, a strategy that would have mixed and ultimately problematic results. Meanwhile, Napoleon extended his influence through the installation of family members and loyal generals on thrones across Europe. His brother Joseph became King of Naples, and later Spain. His brother Louis ruled Holland. His stepson Eugène de Beauharnais was made Viceroy of Italy. This dynastic expansion aimed to secure loyalty and consolidate the empire, but it also bred resentment and resistance in many regions, sparking uprisings and guerrilla warfare. One of the most challenging theaters of Napoleon's empire was Spain, where the Peninsular War 1808-1814 became a costly quagmire. Spanish nationalists, supported by British forces under the Duke of Wellington, waged brutal guerrilla campaigns against French occupiers. The conflict drained French resources and morale, exposing vulnerabilities in Napoleon's control and foreshadowing the difficulties he would later face. Throughout these campaigns, Napoleon combined rapid marches, decisive battles, and innovative tactics to outmaneuver often larger enemy coalitions. His use of core semi-independent army units capable of operating separately but supporting each other allowed for flexibility and surprise. However, the constant warfare took a toll on his soldiers and the populations under French rule, leading to war weariness and opposition. By 1812, at the height of his power, Napoleon launched his ambitious invasion of Russia, seeking to force Tsar Alexander I back into compliance with the continental system. The campaign initially advanced deep into Russian territory, but soon faltered amid scorched earth tactics, harsh winter conditions, and overstretched supply lines. The disastrous retreat from Moscow marked the beginning of Napoleon's decline, as his forces suffered immense losses. Despite setbacks, Napoleon's campaigns between 1804 and 1812 fundamentally altered Europe's political map. Monarchies were displaced, new states created, and the ideas of the French Revolution, legal equality, secular government, centralized administration, spread widely even in conquered lands. Yet the very scale of his conquests sowed the seeds of resistance as nationalist movements and coalitions of great powers eventually coalesced to challenge his dominance. For Napoleon, this era was the zenith of his power,
a period when his military genius and political vision seemed unstoppable. His ability to combine battlefield brilliance with statecraft reshaped an entire continent, leaving an indelible mark on history. However, beneath the triumphs lay growing tensions and vulnerabilities that would soon be tested as the tide of war began to turn.
By 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the zenith of his power, commanding an empire that stretched across much of Europe and had reshaped the continent's political landscape. Yet beneath the glory of his conquests and reforms lay simmering tensions and challenges that would soon test the limits of his authority. One of the most critical of these was his deteriorating relationship with Russia. Tsar Alexander I's refusal to fully adhere to the continental system, a wide-ranging embargo designed to weaken Britain economically by barring trade with continental Europe, was a direct challenge to Napoleon's dominance. Alexander's continued trade with Britain undermined French strategy, frustrated Napoleon, and provided a pretext for war. Determined to enforce his will and punish Russia for defiance, Napoleon assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, the Grande Armée, numbering over 600,000 soldiers drawn from France and its allied states, including Italians, Poles, Germans, and others. The invasion began in June 1812 with a massive, rapid advance into Russian territory. Napoleon's plan was to engage and decisively defeat the Russian armies in a swift campaign before the harsh Russian winter set in. However, the Russians, under experienced generals such as Mikhail Kutuzov, adopted a strategy of strategic withdrawal combined with scorched earth tactics. As they retreated, they systematically destroyed crops, burned villages, and removed or destroyed supplies that the French might use. This ruthless but effective policy left the invading French army without access to local resources, forcing it to rely on long, vulnerable supply lines stretching hundreds of miles back to France. The vastness of the Russian landscape compounded the logistical nightmare. The Battle of Borodino in early September 1812 was the campaign's pivotal and bloodiest engagement. The French army, despite suffering heavy casualties, managed to seize the battlefield, but the victory was Pyrrhic. The Russian army was not destroyed and withdrew in good order, refusing to capitulate. Napoleon's troops, exhausted and diminished, pressed on to Moscow, expecting a decisive political settlement. However, upon entering the city in mid-September, they found Moscow largely abandoned and soon engulfed in flames. The cause of the fires remains debated, but the destruction denied the French a vital supply base and winter shelter. With the onset of autumn and winter, the situation rapidly deteriorated. Napoleon stayed in the ruined city for over a month, hoping for negotiations that never materialized. The French army suffered from shortages of food, fodder, and warm clothing as temperatures plunged. Disease, hunger, and exposure ravaged the troops. In October, with no realistic prospects, Napoleon ordered a retreat westward. The withdrawal became a harrowing ordeal marked by constant harassment from Russian forces and partisans employing guerrilla tactics that further depleted the already weakened French ranks. The retreat was marked by freezing temperatures, icy roads, and near constant attacks. Horses and men died in staggering numbers from frostbite, starvation, and exhaustion. Crossing the Berezina River in late November was one of the most desperate moments. The French hastily constructed makeshift bridges under fire, managing to escape, but suffering enormous losses. By the time the remnants of the Grande Armée staggered out of Russia, fewer than 100,000 soldiers remained. The catastrophic losses shattered Napoleon's military might and reputation for invincibility. The invasion's failure had profound consequences beyond the battlefield. News of the disaster galvanized Napoleon's enemies, leading to the formation of the Sixth Coalition, which included Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and others. The campaign exposed the vulnerabilities of Napoleon's vast empire, undermined the morale of his allies, and ignited nationalist uprisings in occupied territories. It marked the beginning of a rapid decline from which Napoleon would never fully recover. The Russian campaign is remembered as one of history's most devastating military failures, illustrating the deadly combination of overambition, logistical miscalculation, and the unforgiving nature of geography and climate. For Napoleon, it was the turning point where his dream of a united European empire began to unravel. Despite his indomitable will and tactical genius, the campaign revealed the limits of power when stretched too far and faced with resilient opposition. Following the disastrous Russian campaign of 1812, Napoleon's grip on Europe began to weaken dramatically. His once formidable Grande Armée had been decimated, and the loss of so many men and resources emboldened his enemies to form the Sixth Coalition, a powerful alliance consisting of Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and several German states. These nations, united by the common goal of ending Napoleon's dominance, launched coordinated military efforts to push back French forces and reclaim their territories. The period between 1813 and 1814 marked a critical phase in the Napoleonic Wars, characterized by intense battles, shifting alliances, and the gradual erosion of Napoleon's empire. The campaign of 1813, often referred to as the War of the Sixth Coalition, saw fierce fighting across Central Europe, particularly in Germany. Napoleon, despite his weakened forces, demonstrated remarkable resilience and tactical brilliance. He won several battles, including the Battle of Dresden in August 1813, where he repelled a much larger coalition army. However, his victories were costly and failed to stem the overall momentum of the coalition forces, which had learned from earlier defeats and improved their coordination. The pivotal confrontation came at the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, also known as the Battle of Nations, the largest and bloodiest battle of the Napoleonic Wars. Here, coalition armies vastly outnumbered Napoleon's troops and encircled them in a massive engagement lasting several days. Despite fierce resistance, the French were overwhelmed and forced to retreat westward. The defeat at Leipzig was catastrophic and marked a turning point, shattering Napoleon's hold on Germany and signaling the beginning of the end for his empire. In the wake of Leipzig, coalition forces advanced into French territory. Napoleon hastily raised new armies and attempted to defend the French borders, but his resources were stretched thin. The Allies moved steadily toward Paris, encountering resistance, but driven by the desire to end Napoleon's rule. Inside France, political and social unrest grew, fueled by war exhaustion and economic hardship. The climax of this campaign came in early 1814 with the Allies' invasion of France. Despite Napoleon's skillful defensive maneuvers and several tactical victories against the invading armies, the overwhelming numbers and persistent pressure of the coalition forces made defense increasingly untenable. Paris, the heart of the empire, was poorly defended and vulnerable. In late March 1814, coalition troops entered Paris after a brief siege. The fall of the capital was a profound psychological blow to Napoleon and his supporters. Facing abandonment by many of his generals and dwindling support, Napoleon was forced to abdicate the throne on April 6, 1814. The Treaty of Fontainebleau formalized his exile to the small Mediterranean island of Elba, where he was granted sovereignty but removed from European affairs. The fall of Napoleon and the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy under Louis XV marked the end of an era, yet the Napoleonic legacy endured in the reforms, nationalist awakenings, and political changes that had swept across Europe. The Congress of Vienna soon convened to redraw the continent's map and establish a new balance of power aimed at preventing future widespread conflict. The campaigns of the Sixth Coalition and the fall of Paris revealed the limits of even the most brilliant military leadership when faced with overwhelming opposition and sustained resistance. Napoleon's ability to inspire and command had been extraordinary, but the combined weight of multiple great powers, logistical challenges, and internal dissent ultimately overwhelmed him. Though exiled, Napoleon's story was far from over. His escape from Elba and return to power for the Hundred Days would soon plunge Europe back into conflict, setting the stage for his final downfall. But the events of 1813 to 1814 stand as a testament to the resilience of the coalitions arrayed against him and the complex dynamics that ended the Napoleonic era. In early 1814, after a series of devastating defeats and the fall of Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte was forced to abdicate the throne and was exiled to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Though the island was tiny, only about 224 square kilometers, it was given to Napoleon as a sovereign principality, a gilded cage meant to keep him isolated from European affairs. The exile was meant to end his political and military ambitions. However, Napoleon's restless spirit and unyielding ambition made clear that this was far from the end of his story. From Elba, he closely observed the shifting political situation in France and Europe, carefully planning his next move. By early 1815, dissatisfaction with the restored Bourbon monarchy of Louis XV was growing in France. Many were unhappy with the return to old regimes and the reversal of revolutionary gains. Soldiers, bureaucrats, and common citizens alike still held loyalty and admiration for Napoleon, viewing him as a symbol of national pride and strength. Sensing this unrest, Napoleon decided to escape from Elba. On February 26, 1815, he slipped away with around 1,000 followers aboard a small fleet, evading the British and other Allied naval patrols. Landing on the southern coast of France at Gulf-Juan on March 1st, Napoleon began a bold and rapid march toward Paris. Despite orders from Louis XV to arrest him on sight, Napoleon's legend preceded him. As he advanced, troops sent to stop him instead defected to his cause, and crowds gathered to cheer his return. His march was largely bloodless. Rather than fighting, he inspired loyalty and enthusiasm. Within a matter of weeks, Napoleon reached Paris and reclaimed power, marking the beginning of the period known as the Hundred Days. The return of Napoleon plunged Europe into renewed conflict. The great powers, Britain, Russia, Austria, Prussia, and others quickly formed the Seventh Coalition, determined to defeat him once and for all. Napoleon faced the daunting task of confronting these combined forces while rebuilding an army and government that had been dismantled during his exile. Despite these challenges, he acted swiftly, mobilizing around 200,000 troops and preparing to meet the Allied armies that had gathered in Belgium. The decisive clash came on June 18, 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon commanded approximately 73,000 men, facing a coalition force of about 118,000, composed primarily of British, Dutch, Belgian, and German troops, under the Duke of Wellington, and Prussian forces led by Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. The battle was fierce and grueling, with intense fighting lasting from early morning until evening. Napoleon's strategy involved a series of attacks aimed at breaking the coalition's line before the Prussians could reinforce Wellington. Early French assaults were met with stubborn resistance. Wellington skillfully used the terrain, defensive positions, and well-timed counterattacks to blunt the French offensives. As the day wore on, the arrival of the Prussian army on Napoleon's right flank proved decisive. Their timely intervention pressured the French forces, stretching them thin and forcing a retreat. The French army's collapse was swift and chaotic. Napoleon's veteran troops were overwhelmed by superior numbers, exhaustion, and dwindling morale. The defeat at Waterloo ended Napoleon's last chance at reclaiming European dominance. The once formidable emperor fled the battlefield, seeking refuge in Paris. In the aftermath, political support for Napoleon crumbled rapidly. Facing internal opposition and the inevitability of Allied invasion, he abdicated for the second time on June 22, 1815. He initially sought asylum in the United States, but was captured by British forces and sent into exile on the remote South Atlantic island of St. Helena, over 1,800 miles from the African coast. This exile was harsher and more isolated than Elba, intended to prevent any further escapes or attempts to regain power. Napoleon would spend the final 6 years of his life on St. Helena, under constant British supervision. Though removed from the political stage, he remained a figure of fascination, dictating memoirs, reflecting on his career, and maintaining correspondence. He died there in 1821, a man whose life had dramatically altered the course of European history. The Hundred Days and the Battle of Waterloo stand as a dramatic final act in Napoleon's saga, an extraordinary comeback cut short by overwhelming opposition. This period highlighted both his remarkable charisma and tactical skill, as well as the limits of ambition when faced with united resistance. The legacy of Waterloo and Napoleon's final exile shaped Europe's future, ushering in a new era of relative peace and the reshaping of nations at the Congress of Vienna. After his final defeat at Waterloo and second abdication in June 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, situated in the South Atlantic Ocean, nearly 1,800 miles from the coast of Africa. This tiny volcanic island, barren and isolated, was chosen by the British to ensure that Napoleon could no longer influence European affairs or mount any further attempts to regain power. The conditions of his exile were far harsher than his earlier stay on Elba, guarded closely by a British military detachment and cut off from the world. Napoleon was effectively imprisoned for the last 6 years of his life. St. Helena was a lonely and rugged place, a world away from the grandeur of Parisian courts and battlefields. Napoleon initially took up residence in a modest but comfortable house called Longwood, which, despite efforts to improve it, was damp and unhealthy. His physical health began to decline rapidly, exacerbated by the island's harsh climate and the psychological strain of confinement. Cut off from friends and family, Napoleon's social interactions were limited primarily to a small group of loyal followers who had accompanied him into exile and a rotating set of British guards and officials. Though isolated, he remained mentally active, dictating his memoirs and reflecting on the extraordinary trajectory of his life. During these years, Napoleon's thoughts often turned to his legacy. He sought to justify his actions and portray his rule as a force of progress and reform rather than mere conquest and ambition. His writings painted a picture of himself as a visionary leader who had spread the ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and legal order across Europe. He reflected on his military campaigns, the challenges he faced, and the betrayals he believed he had suffered. These memoirs would later influence historians and shape the legend of Napoleon as both a brilliant strategist and a tragic figure. Despite his declining health, Napoleon remained deeply engaged in political matters through correspondence with allies and observers in Europe. He closely followed the evolving European political scene, wary of the powers that had restored the Bourbon monarchy and determined to control the continent's future. Yet his ability to affect events was effectively nullified by his captivity. Physically, Napoleon's condition worsened over time. He suffered from chronic abdominal pain and weight loss, symptoms that modern historians often attribute to stomach cancer, though some have speculated other causes. His physicians, limited by the medical knowledge and resources of the era, struggled to alleviate his suffering. Throughout his decline, Napoleon maintained a stoic demeanor, often engaged in deep conversation with his companions about philosophy, history, and leadership. Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. His death was met with a mixture of relief, sorrow, and fascination throughout Europe. For many, he remained a symbol of both revolutionary change and imperial ambition. His final words, as reported by those close to him, reflected his enduring sense of destiny. France, the army, the head of the army, Josephine. Following his death, Napoleon was buried on St. Helena, but his legacy continued to loom large. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1840, his remains were exhumed and returned to France in a dramatic repatriation known as the Retour de Cendres. He was interred with great ceremony at Les Invalides in Paris, where his tomb remains a site of national memory and reflection. Napoleon's final years on St. Helena encapsulate the tragic end of a figure who had risen from obscurity to dominate an era. His exile was not just a physical banishment, but a symbolic closure to a life marked by extraordinary ambition, brilliance, and controversy. Through his reforms, military campaigns, and vision, Napoleon left an indelible mark on France and Europe, shaping political, legal, and military history for generations to come. Napoleon Bonaparte's influence extended far beyond the battlefield, and the throne, one of his most enduring legacies, lies in his profound impact on legal systems, particularly through the establishment of the Napoleonic Code, officially known as the Civil Code of 1804. This body of laws was a sweeping reform that sought to unify and modernize French law in the aftermath of the Revolution's upheavals. Before the code's enactment, France's legal landscape was fragmented and inconsistent, riddled with a patchwork of feudal laws, local customs, and revolutionary decrees that varied from region to region. Napoleon's code replaced this chaos with a clear, accessible, and coherent system designed to promote legal equality, protect property rights, and strengthen the authority of the state. The Napoleonic Code was revolutionary in several key respects. First, it enshrined the principle of legal equality for all men before the law, abolishing the privileges of birth and class that had long characterized the ancient regime. This aligned with the ideals of the French Revolution, emphasizing merit and citizenship over aristocratic privilege. Property rights were rigorously protected, providing a secure framework for commerce and economic development. The code also standardized contracts, inheritance laws, and civil procedures, simplifying legal processes and making them more predictable. While the code advanced many progressive principles, it also reflected the conservative and patriarchal values of its time. It curtailed the rights of women, limiting their legal autonomy and reinforcing the authority of the male head of household. For example, married women had restricted control over property and were largely subject to their husband's authority. Labor rights were minimal, and the code did not address many social inequalities, focusing instead on legal order and state authority. Napoleon's legal reforms were not confined to France. As his armies conquered or influenced vast territories across Europe, the Napoleonic Code was introduced in numerous countries, either wholly or in adapted forms. In Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, parts of Germany, Poland, and Switzerland, the code laid the foundation for modern civil law traditions. Even after Napoleon's downfall, many of these regions retained the code's principles, recognizing its clarity, fairness, and administrative efficiency. Beyond Europe, the Napoleonic Code's reach extended globally through colonial and legal influences. In Latin America, countries like Chile and Argentina modeled their civil codes on Napoleon's laws as they established their own independent legal systems. Louisiana, in the United States, adopted a civil law tradition based on the code, distinguishing it from the common law used in other states. Today, the Napoleonic Code is seen as a cornerstone of the civil law legal tradition, influencing the legal frameworks of over 70 countries worldwide. The code's significance lies not only in its content, but also in the manner in which it codified laws into a systematic written form accessible to citizens and officials alike. This codification process marked a shift from feudal and customary law to a rational, secular legal order governed by clear statutes. It strengthened the role of the state as the ultimate arbiter of justice, consolidating authority while providing legal certainty. Napoleon's legal legacy also inspired later reforms and codifications around the world. The principles of equality before the law, protection of property, and the standardization of civil rights resonated with emerging modern states seeking to build coherent legal systems. While the code reflected the complexities and contradictions of its era, it remains a landmark in the history of law and governance. In sum, the Napoleonic Code was more than just a set of laws. It was a transformative vision of society governed by reason, equality, and order. It translated revolutionary ideals into practical legal structures that endured long after Napoleon's empire faded. This legal framework, combined with Napoleon's broader reforms, helped shape the modern state and left a global imprint on the administration of justice. Napoleon Bonaparte's lasting impact is as much rooted in his revolutionary military innovations as it is in his political and legal reforms. Throughout his career, Napoleon transformed the art of warfare, introducing tactics, organizational structures, and logistical strategies that reshaped armies and battlefields across Europe and set new standards for modern military practice. His genius lay not only in his battlefield tactics, but also in his ability to integrate strategy, mobility, morale, and administration into a cohesive and formidable war machine. One of Napoleon's most significant military contributions was his reorganization of the army into corps, a flexible system of large, semi-independent units that could operate on their own but also support one another. Each corps consisted of infantry, cavalry, artillery, and support units, making them versatile and capable of rapid maneuvers. This corps system allowed Napoleon to execute complex plans with speed and coordination, striking at enemy forces in unexpected ways and concentrating strength where it was most needed. It increased operational flexibility, allowing for simultaneous advances, feints, and flanking maneuvers that kept opponents off balance. Napoleon's mastery of rapid movement was central to his success. His armies marched faster and farther than those of his enemies, enabling him to achieve surprise and choose favorable ground for battle. This emphasis on mobility disrupted traditional warfare, where slow moving armies often faced stalemates. By moving quickly and striking decisively, Napoleon could engage isolated enemy units before they could consolidate and respond effectively. Artillery played a crucial role in Napoleon's tactics. He innovated the use of massed artillery batteries that could break enemy lines and support infantry advances. His keen understanding of terrain and timing meant that artillery barrages were coordinated with infantry and cavalry actions to maximize impact. Napoleon's background as an artillery officer gave him a technical advantage in deploying and utilizing firepower effectively on the battlefield. Tactically, Napoleon emphasized the use of combined arms, integrating infantry, cavalry, and artillery to complement each other's strengths and cover weaknesses. He exploited terrain to his advantage, used deception and feints to confuse opponents, and maintained tight discipline and morale among his troops. His ability to adapt plans rapidly to changing circumstances made him a formidable opponent. Logistics, often overlooked by commanders of his era, was a key aspect of Napoleon's military innovation. He developed efficient supply systems that sustained his armies during rapid advances and long campaigns. His emphasis on foraging and local requisitioning, while controversial, allowed his forces to remain mobile without reliance on slow supply trains. This logistical agility contributed to his operational tempo and battlefield effectiveness. Napoleon also revolutionized military organization and leadership. He promoted officers based on merit and talent rather than noble birth, creating a motivated and capable officer corps. This meritocratic approach ensured that his units were led by competent commanders who understood their roles and could execute complex maneuvers. The influence of Napoleon's military innovations extended far beyond his lifetime. His strategies and organizational principles became the foundation for modern armies around the world. Military theorists and leaders studied his campaigns for lessons in strategy, tactics, and leadership. His approach to rapid maneuver, corps-level autonomy, and combined arms operations informed later military developments, including those seen in the World Wars. However, Napoleon's methods were not without their drawbacks. His reliance on aggressive offensive tactics sometimes led to high casualties and stretched supply lines, as seen in the disastrous Russian campaign. Yet, his overall impact on warfare was transformative, marking the transition from 18th century linear tactics
to the more dynamic and integrated military strategies of the 19th and 20th centuries. In summary, Napoleon's military innovations combined brilliant tactical insight, organizational genius, and logistical prowess. They allowed him to dominate European battlefields for over a decade and left a legacy that shaped the conduct of war for generations. His ability to innovate and adapt remains a central study in military history, highlighting how leadership and strategy can redefine the possibilities of armed conflict.
Napoleon Bonaparte's impact on France extended far beyond his military conquests and legal codifications. His political and social reforms fundamentally reshaped French society and governance, leaving a legacy that persisted long after his reign. Rising from the chaos of the French Revolution, Napoleon sought to stabilize the nation by balancing revolutionary ideals with pragmatic governance, creating a centralized and efficient state that could sustain order, economic growth, and national pride. One of Napoleon's foremost political achievements was the establishment of a strong centralized government. He reorganized the administrative structure of France, creating a hierarchy of prefects, officials appointed by the central government to oversee departments and implement policies. This system reduced local autonomy but ensured uniform enforcement of laws and decrees across the country. By centralizing power, Napoleon increased efficiency and curtailed the political fragmentation that had plagued France during the Revolution. To legitimize his rule, Napoleon implemented the Concordat of 1801, an agreement with the Catholic Church that restored some religious freedoms while maintaining state control over church affairs. This concordat ended the Revolutionary era's anti-clericalism and reconciled many Catholics to the new regime, stabilizing social order. While the Church regained influence, it remained subordinate to the state, reflecting Napoleon's belief in controlling religious institutions rather than yielding to them. Napoleon also established the Legion of Honor, an institution that rewarded merit and service to the state regardless of noble birth. This fostered loyalty among military officers, civil servants, and citizens, promoting a culture of achievement and patriotism. The Legion became a symbol of Napoleon's meritocratic ideals and helped integrate diverse social groups into the new imperial order. In education, Napoleon reformed the French system to produce loyal and capable bureaucrats and military leaders. He founded lycées, state-run secondary schools that emphasized discipline, secular curriculum, and loyalty to the state. These institutions helped create a professional class aligned with Napoleonic values and needs, shaping generations of French elites. Napoleon's social reforms reflected a mixture of revolutionary ideals and conservative pragmatism. He upheld legal equality for men and secured property rights, providing stability for the bourgeoisie and middle classes. However, his policies reinforced patriarchal norms by limiting women's rights, as codified in the Napoleonic Code. His regime discouraged radical democratic movements, favoring order and hierarchy over popular sovereignty. Economically, Napoleon pursued policies to stimulate growth and stabilize finances. He reorganized the tax system to be more efficient and less arbitrary, established the Bank of France to regulate currency and credit, and promoted infrastructure projects like roads and canals. These efforts modernized the French economy, improved communication and transportation, and laid the groundwork for industrialization. Napoleon's reforms also aimed to unify the French identity. He standardized the French language and symbols,
promoted national education, and used propaganda to cultivate loyalty to the empire. Through ceremonies, monuments, and the arts, he fostered a sense of shared history and purpose that transcended regional differences. The long-term effects of Napoleon's political and social reforms were profound. They stabilized a nation that had been torn by revolution and war, creating institutions that endured through subsequent regimes. Many modern French administrative, legal, and educational structures trace their origins to this period. While Napoleon's authoritarian tendencies limited democratic development, his reforms established principles of meritocracy, secular governance, and national unity that influenced the evolution of the modern French state. In sum, Napoleon's political and social reforms represent a complex blend of revolutionary ideals and imperial pragmatism. They sought to create a stable, efficient, and loyal society under centralized control, balancing progress with order. This legacy shaped France's trajectory throughout the 19th century and beyond, highlighting how leadership and policy can transform society even amid upheaval.
Napoleon Bonaparte was not only a master of the battlefield and governance, but also a keen architect of his own image. Throughout his rise and reign, he skillfully used propaganda and the arts to craft a public persona that projected power, legitimacy, and almost mythic status. Understanding the importance of perception, Napoleon employed painters, writers, architects, and the media of his day to shape how he was seen by both the French people and the wider world, a strategy that greatly enhanced his authority and helped solidify his legacy. One of the central tools of Napoleon's propaganda was visual art, particularly portraiture and grand historical paintings. He commissioned renowned artists like Jacques-Louis David, whose dramatic and idealized depictions of Napoleon emphasized his qualities as a heroic leader and enlightened ruler. David's iconic works, such as The Coronation of Napoleon and Napoleon Crossing the Alps, presented Napoleon as a figure of divine right and unshakable resolve. These images circulated widely, reinforcing a narrative of Napoleon as a visionary and invincible commander. The deliberate use of symbolism, robes reminiscent of Roman emperors, laurel wreaths, and grand gestures, evoked continuity with the great rulers of history and underscored his legitimacy. Beyond painting, Napoleon understood the power of architecture and public monuments in shaping national identity and his own image. He commissioned the construction and renovation of landmarks, such as the Arc de Triomphe, designed to celebrate French military victories and glorify his reign. These monumental projects served as permanent reminders of his achievements and fostered a sense of pride and unity among the populace. Streets, squares, and institutions were often renamed in his honor, embedding his presence into the everyday fabric of French life. Napoleon also manipulated the emerging print culture to disseminate favorable news and control information. Newspapers, pamphlets, and bulletins were carefully managed, emphasizing his successes and minimizing setbacks. The French government exercised censorship over the press, suppressing dissent and ensuring that public discourse aligned with the regime's interests. Official proclamations and speeches were crafted to inspire loyalty and rally support, often invoking patriotic themes and the glory of France. Literature and poetry were enlisted to celebrate Napoleon and his empire. Writers composed epic poems, historical dramas, and biographies that lionized his achievements and valor. This cultural production created a mythos around Napoleon, portraying him as both a man of the people and a transcendent hero destined to shape history. At the same time, Napoleon cultivated a court culture that valued arts and letters, attracting intellectuals and artists whose work could enhance his prestige. Napoleon's propaganda extended to symbols and ceremonies that reinforced his authority. Elaborate coronation rituals, military parades, and public ceremonies were staged to display his power and connect him to the divine and historical traditions. Uniforms, medals, and other regalia were designed to convey discipline, honor, and unity within the empire. These visible expressions of power helped maintain order and inspire loyalty among soldiers and civilians alike. However, the propagandistic image of Napoleon was not without contradictions. While many admired him as a liberator and reformer, others viewed him as a dictator and warmonger. Resistance movements and occupied peoples often rejected the imposed image, creating alternative narratives of suffering and oppression. Yet, even opponents acknowledged the power of his symbolism and the skill with which he managed public perception. The legacy of Napoleon's use of propaganda and the arts is significant. He demonstrated how modern rulers could harness culture and media to construct powerful political narratives, shaping not only their immediate rule, but also historical memory. The iconography and myths surrounding Napoleon continue to influence popular imagination and scholarly interpretations of his life. In conclusion, Napoleon's mastery of propaganda and the arts was a crucial element of his success and enduring legacy. By controlling images, narratives, and symbols, he crafted a public persona that combined strength, legitimacy, and visionary leadership. This calculated cultivation of image helped maintain his power, mobilize support, and ensure that his name would resonate through history. Napoleon Bonaparte's life and career left an indelible mark on Europe and the world, shaping the political, legal, military, and cultural landscapes in ways that continue to resonate centuries after his death. His legacy is complex and multifaceted, combining extraordinary achievements with profound controversies and reflecting both the promise and perils of revolutionary change and imperial ambition. At the heart of Napoleon's legacy was his role as a transformative figure who reshaped the map and governance of Europe. Through his military conquests, he dismantled old feudal structures, spread revolutionary ideals, and challenged established monarchies. His redrawing of borders, creation of satellite states, and imposition of reforms accelerated the modernization of many European societies. Yet his empire was built on constant warfare, bringing devastation to millions and triggering fierce nationalist resistance. Napoleon's legal reforms, especially the Napoleonic Code, stand as one of his most enduring contributions. By codifying laws that emphasized equality before the law, protection of property, and secular governance, he laid the groundwork for modern legal systems, not only in France, but across much of the world. The principles embedded in his code continue to influence civil law traditions on multiple continents, serving as a foundation for justice and administration. Militarily, Napoleon revolutionized the art of war. His innovative tactics, organizational reforms, and emphasis on mobility transformed how armies operated. The core system combined arms tactics and strategic use of artillery, reshaped European warfare, and influenced military thought for generations. His successes and failures, offered lessons in leadership, logistics, and the limits of ambition. Politically and socially, Napoleon's centralization of power brought stability to a France torn by revolution and unrest. His reforms in administration, education, and religion helped unify the nation and promote a sense of identity and purpose. However, his authoritarian rule curtailed democratic freedoms and reinforced social hierarchies, revealing tensions between order and liberty that continue to be debated. Culturally, Napoleon's savvy use of propaganda and the arts crafted a powerful image of leadership that enhanced his legitimacy and fostered national pride. His legacy as a mythic figure, heroic, ambitious, and sometimes tragic, has permeated literature, art, and popular culture, shaping how history remembers him. Napoleon's downfall and exile highlighted the limits of personal ambition against the forces of geopolitics and coalition opposition. Yet, even in defeat, his impact persisted, influencing the Congress of Vienna's attempts to create a lasting balance of power in Europe. The nationalist movements and liberal ideas, awakened or accelerated during his reign, would continue to shape the 19th century. In sum, Napoleon Bonaparte was a catalyst for profound change, a leader whose genius and flaws were inseparable from the tumultuous era he dominated. His legacy is a testament to the power of vision and determination, the consequences of unbridled ambition, and the enduring tension between revolutionary ideals and authoritarian rule. Modern Europe, with its legal systems, political institutions, and military traditions, bears the imprint of Napoleon's extraordinary life, making him one of history's most influential and fascinating figures. Thank you for joining this deep dive into Napoleon's life and legacy. If you enjoyed this detailed exploration and want to learn more about fascinating historical figures and events, don't forget to subscribe to History Release and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Stay curious and see you in the next journey through history.